get started.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Michael Polson. I'm the director of the Cannabis Research Center at UC Berkeley. This is maybe the third or fourth in a series this semester of brown bag kind of lunch idea research conversation series. The idea behind this is to bring out and highlight research being done across California on topics relevant to what we do at the Cannabis Research Center, which is try to understand issues around cultivation, around communities, and around policy and environmental issues facing California's cannabis scene. So this is the second in this second semester. We've actually been doing these conversation meetings with different researchers. And today we're really happy to welcome Katya Moiseeva to speak with us. And I'll be introducing Joanna Hossack, who will be in conversation with Katya for this session. Want to advance the slides? Or are we in presentation mode?
There we go.
Great, okay.
Still loading.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, you can move to the second. So today we'll just, Joanna will spend a few moments just introducing Katya, and then we'll move on to discuss some of the research that Katya is involved with, and then we'll talk through some questions and answers with all of us, with some of you. And in closing, we'll just wrap it up with some ideas about what CRC events are coming up. These are the important buttons to know on your dashboard here. If you want to speak, which is possible during the Q&A session, then feel free to turn on your audio. But generally, you're welcome to insert questions into the chat function, and then we'll answer those when the time comes. And as we're going, if you feel like reacting, go for it.
Excellent. So I can jump in, introduce myself. My name is Joanna Hossack. I'm a specialist at the UC Berkeley Institute of Urban and Regional Development. I've been working on cannabis research for the past 3.5 years, funded by the Department of Cannabis Control, looking at the local regulation of cannabis, both permit counties and bans, and really diving into the regulatory structure, both at the state and the local level for licensees. I am very excited to both meet and get to interview Katya Moiseeva on her research. She is a PhD candidate at UC Irvine. She has published work on the logic of NIMBYism, class, race, and stigma in the making of California's legal cannabis market. I'm going to share that in the chat so you can all take a look at that. And today she's here to discuss her work on the cost of legality in California's cannabis market. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Why don't we start with you just sort of introducing yourself to the audience and telling us the background about your article regarding the cost of legality in California's cannabis market.
Thank you. Thank you for this kind introduction. I'm glad to be here today and speak about my research. So the article I'm discussing today was submitted to a sociology journal and it's still under review. But before I speak about it, I just wanted to provide maybe some broader context for my research. So I'm a sociologist, criminologist, and social legal scholar, and I'm interested in cannabis legalization from these perspectives. I've been studying cannabis since 2018, and my research started when I found statistics on cannabis licenses issued in California. So the Department of Cannabis Control, which at the time was the Bureau of Cannabis Control and Department of Food and Agriculture and Public Health, so they all published this data on licenses that they were issuing, and this information also included location and the city. And so I collected all the statistics for 2018 and 19 and aggregated it to the city level. And my interest was to look at whether cities that support cannabis legalization and those that allow cannabis businesses are the same cities. And so this is the article that was shared now in chat. So it's called The Logic of NIMBYism. It was recently published in Law and Social Inquiry. And briefly, it just shows that communities that support legalization and those that allow cannabis businesses are not the same. And so the main difference is in their socioeconomic characteristics. So we will see that white, prosperous communities that see themselves as progressive, they would be more likely to support cannabis legalization. However, we see that it's more likely that it will be poor Hispanic communities that have lower support of cannabis will be allowing cannabis businesses, and this happens due to potential tax revenue. And so these results, from the very beginning, I wanted to do an ethnographic study. But these results, they laid the foundation for the ethnographic part of my research. And so it encouraged me to look closely at how Prop 64 is implemented on the ground, and also on how the costs and benefits of legalization are distributed across race, gender, and class lines. So speaking about my research questions, so I'm interested in the legality, in how the legality of cannabis is being constructed by looking at everyday practices of various actors. And my ethnographic work, so I conducted it from 2021 to 2024. And in total, as of now, I interviewed 97 participants. And my main focus was on cannabis businesses, both licensed and unlicensed, and also on local officials, including mayors, city council members, planning divisions, managers of social equity programs, and DCC. And I also conducted interviews with social activists, with cannabis lawyers, with influencers and other actors, just to understand the broader context of legalization. And finally, I also did observations at different cannabis events, from MJBizCon in Las Vegas to the Hall of Flowers in Santa Rosa and in Ventura, and to local events such as mixers for social equity applicants or summits organized by city governments and so on. And I also conducted observations of city council meetings where cannabis regulation was discussed in the past few years. So this is just a very broad overview of what I'm doing in my research.
Amazing. I can imagine that was a lot of fun going to MJ Biz and Hall of Flowers. Those are great events. So can you talk a little bit about how you chose the study jurisdictions that you worked in?
Yes. So I wanted to focus on one region, specific region, and study it in detail. And so this region is Southern California. So most studies of cannabis in California, especially qualitative studies, they focus on the Bay Area, which makes a lot of sense because this is the hub of the cannabis reform movement and the home to many cannabis organizations. But I feel that the Los Angeles area and Southern California in general are slightly understudied. And at the same time, this is one of the most densely populated regions in the US with abundant economic opportunities. So since I was interested in the development of the legal industry, it looked like a perfect site for my research. And I wanted to create a sample of locations and individuals as diverse as possible. So I focused on 6 different counties: Orange County, Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Riverside. And collectively, they account for approximately 1/3 of California's cannabis market. And what was important to me is that the cities within these counties, they varied significantly in terms of public support for cannabis legalization, or the number of licenses issued, or racial and ethnic composition, socioeconomic factors, agricultural landscapes, and so on. And also my data from my statistical analysis, they allowed me to compare the profiles of different cities and then select cases from different parts of the distribution. So I tried to select cities that are both poor and rich, liberal and conservative, coastal and inland, those that legalize, those that didn't legalize or still discussing how to legalize. So it's a very diverse sample. And the same for interviews with, so this paper that we're discussing today, it's mostly based on interviews with cannabis businesses. Now I'm working on interviews with local authorities, and this will be my next project. So the central focus in the interviews with cannabis businesses was on their experiences and their perspectives on licensing, taxation, competition, how they interact with local officials, and how they manage stigma. And when I started my interviews, I used the official register of the Department of Cannabis Control. And so during the first round of my interviews, I understood that my sample has some limitations, and the notable one was its homophily. So the average cannabis license holder in my sample was a white middle-class young man who entered the market after Prop 64, most of them. And so because of this demographic skew of the legal market, I also implemented targeted sampling, and that's what I was doing in the later stages of my research, trying to create a more diverse range of participants, including more women, LGBTQ plus individuals, people of color, social equity applicants, and also unlicensed businesses.
Wow, I think it's so great that you focused on LA and Southern California, because you're absolutely right. So much of the research has been in Northern California, Bay Area, and LA is really the biggest retail market, and just having access to that is so important. So I'm really glad that, people are starting to focus on Southern California. What were the biggest surprises that came out of your research?
Oh, there were many surprises. Building on what I just said, it was really interesting to see how people with different backgrounds craft their narratives about the black market. So when I asked about their general experiences in the legal market, all legal businesses were saying very similar things. So they jumped right away to discussing the cost of legality, how expensive it is to be legal, how everybody around them is losing money, and that being unlicensed is much easier. And this is what we know from any research on cannabis in any state. So being legal is expensive. But then their understanding of why this cost of legality exists and how to address them and what to do about it, that was different. So most legal businesses, especially those from the corporate sector and new businesses, they were more likely to speak about how the black market struggles the legal market. And they all often will be speaking about illicit operators, or as like not business savvy or not competent enough, or prone to engaging in illicit activities due to their previous background. So they often assigned illegality to individuals' moral failing. And I think this narrative is troubling because it reflects implicit racial biases that exist in the legal cannabis space. At the same time, when I was speaking about asking the same questions, and was speaking with legacy operators or with social equity applicants, especially people of color, they would craft completely different narratives. So they didn't see it as a moral failing of individuals, but more as a failure of the state to regulate and to create a framework where actors who do not belong to the corporate sector can also benefit. And so this was one of, I guess, main surprises at the early stage of my research, is to think about how the creation of a legal framework can lead to the proliferation of illicit activities, and also how easily people would adopt a punitive logic and rely on some old drug war stereotypes to solve what they see the problem of the black market. And that also kind of justified where my research was taking me, and diversifying my sample.
Yes. Yes to all of that. Oh my goodness. Well, you're talking about legalization, and we're talking about Prop 64, which obviously legalized cannabis. And the goals of Prop 64 were to bring the illicit unregulated cannabis market into a regulatory framework that protected public health, public safety, and the environment. Prop 64 was a long document. There were lots of different goals and ambitions and perceptions of what the goals of Prop 64 were. But I guess to boil it down, do you think the goals or the intents of Prop 64 are being met currently?
This is a very good question. And the way you outline the goals now, I would say yes. Because if you look at how Proposition 64 was designed, you kind of see that it just set the stage for the creation of a for-profit industry that benefits certain actors. And so I was just working on the history of legalization and going through all these narratives that were used in Proposition 64. And so you can see that, and then if you speak about Proposition 64 and the goals of the cannabis reform movement, the answer would be no, right? Because we are speaking about it as a social justice reform, but there is not much social justice in the language of Prop 64. And you could see how all these social justice ideas that was somewhere in the air, but they were kind of completely omitted in the discussion.
Mhm.
And there were many not very good compromises with various stakeholders, from police unions to local governments to parental groups, that had to be met in order for that to pass. So I guess that the goals of Prop 64 were met, but the goals of the cannabis reform movement were not.
Mhm. I like how you're putting that. I think, some folks at the time argued that Prop 64 would achieve some social justice goals in regards to criminal penalties and like that type of criminal justice reform, but would create a new form of injustice regarding economic injustice and economic opportunities to participate in the license framework, and that folks would still be subject to civil penalties. So is that sort of what you're finding in your work?
Yes. So that's very similar. Yes. And I should say that there was some goals that were addressed. So, for example, I was speaking with somebody who is with some activist group who work with the expungement programs for criminal records. And they were saying, especially in the beginning, that it was not going well. But it seems it's going better now, even though there are still issues. So it's been a very slow process because of all the bureaucracy, and you had to pass so many different assembly bills for this to actually start working, right? So one Proposition 64 was not enough for that to happen. So there's some good things that are happening, but yeah, it did also create more inequality, and in different areas. And I think one troubling thing that I already mentioned is that many political actors and many legal businesses, they attribute the growth of illicit activities to first to some moral failings of individuals, but also to under enforcement, to lenient policies. And so that's why the first solution would be enhancing law enforcement against unlicensed facilities. So they, again, just rely on punitive measures, but we understand that this will only intensify the criminalization of most vulnerable populations, and it will compromise the social justice goals of the cannabis movement, because it just will give corporate actors even greater advantage in this economy. And also we understand that enhancing law enforcement will not target those who pose a greater threat because they like to speak about like some organized criminal enterprises, what they call Mexican cartels. I don't really like this word, these narratives. But actually enhancing law enforcement, what will happen, it will target those who are the most visible and vulnerable. So those small and medium-sized businesses that try to enter the legal space, but then they failed, but they remained visible. And we can see that this is happening now. For example, I looked at the statistic of the Unified Cannabis Enforcement Task Force, so this new division of the Department of Cannabis Control, and they published data on the amount of cannabis seized in pounds and retail value per raid. So I tried to count how much cannabis they seize per each raid, and it's not much. So it was about 1,000 pounds. And then in my interview with a large cultivation company in Santa Barbara, only in 1 week, they produced more than 22,000. So like, it's like more than 10 times more is what. So, and this shows that the burden of law enforcement will fall on small and medium-sized enterprises. And another thing is like, it wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that racial and ethnic minorities will be arrested at a disproportionately higher rate for unlicensed operations, because the war on drug stereotypes in law enforcement practices didn't change with the passage of Prop 64. So they will be guided by the same rationale as they were during the war on drugs. So I don't think that the real solution to the black market lies in enhancing law enforcement and moving it from misdemeanor to something else.
Yeah, some people have sort of described it as drug war 2.0, post legalization. Does look like we have a question here about the disparity of social equity operators versus general market operators in terms of economic progress. And I know you have, you do touch on some of the social equity aspects in your research. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is a part of my research that I'm working on now. I don't know if I need to see the specific question to understand how to address it, but yeah, this is a big part of my research. So that's something what this is the paper I'm working on now. So I look at the implementation of social equity programs, and there are many issues with, in one of the articles, I think I found in LA Times, they call it the farce of social equity. In my interviews, when I asked, what do you think about social equity programs, people use the language that I cannot use here. And it was a uniform statement. So it doesn't seem to work. And again, that was discussed a lot, that the main issue is access to capital, and social equity programs, they do not address this. And even the money they give, it's not enough. But then also the eligibility criteria. So that's what I see, especially in Los Angeles, is that we see that many people who qualify, because it's not specific to race, and because they cannot make it specific to race, it allows many applicants who do not fit our understanding of social equity applicants to pass. And also it's very common, and that's what I heard a lot in my interviews, is how people would use a social equity applicant just to get a license, just to use a name. And many people were not even thinking that it's something wrong or being ashamed of it. They will be just saying, and I'm applying also for a social equity license. And I will ask how they're doing, and saying, I know a guy who can do it, and this is the amount of money. So that was not even something that they thought maybe I shouldn't share that. That was a very common narrative. So like there are a lot of issues with social justice, and I can speak a little bit more about it if we have any specific question.
I think, yeah, I think hearing a little bit more about that would be great. The second question to that is if you could elaborate on the established legal frameworks that lead operators into the illicit market due to the disincentivized economics.
Okay. So I'll start from far. I want to maybe speak a little bit about what I mean by legality. So as a sociologist and a social legal scholar, I try to examine the concept of legality, what it means to be legal, and how this legality is constructed. And I hope this will answer the question too. So there are two bodies of literature that I rely upon. And the first one is in social legal studies that explores how the law operates in everyday life. So it doesn't look at the law as a fixed set of rules, but more on how legal meanings and institutions are produced and reproduced through daily interactions. And so building on that work, I define legality as a process of rule validation. And I think it's particularly important for studying emerging markets or markets in transition. So cannabis has not become legal with the passage of Prop 64 because all these new rules, they had to be integrated into the existing social system, into existing social practices. They had to be interpreted by participants and validated in their experiences. So that idea of validation of new rules by market participants, I think it really explains the reliance on what we call illicit practices. And so here comes the second body of literature, which is immigration studies. And it's interesting because in immigration studies, they explore legality and legalization from a very specific viewpoint. So they describe illegality as a product of state control, as a result of interactions with the state. So it's not about personal qualities. And they see legality and illegality not as binary categories, but as two poles on a continuum. So there's a variety of behaviors and roles and identities that would fall between being fully legal and being fully illegal. And they operate with concepts such as like liminal legality or semi-legality to describe this uncertainty about the legal status, and using the example of undocumented immigrants and how they deal with their semi-legal status being legal in some aspects and illegal in other aspects. And so the key point here is that immigrants would employ different strategies to reduce uncertainty of their legal status and achieve legal recognition. And sometimes these strategies are legally questionable. And this is what I see in all of my interviews. Every time I speak with those who are unlicensed or who just sold their license, they say that they don't want to be illegal. So nobody wants to be illegal. People just don't see how to enter this legal space. And so that's what I see in my interviews also, is that there are plenty of practices that you cannot call completely legal, or like you cannot say that this company is fully legal or this company is fully illegal, because it's such a mix of different forms of legality, semi-legality, quasi-legality, near-legality. So this is how I try to think about it. We know licensed businesses that use that engage maybe in under the table sales to avoid taxes, and they do it because they want to maintain their legal status, because they need money to pay for something else, and that's the only way they can do it. And I also see that I've seen many unlicensed operators who complying with labeling and testing requirements, and they don't have any legal obligation to do it, but they do it because they want to mimic legality. So they want to look as, and I don't know if you had a chance to see actually products that were manufactured by licensed and unlicensed participants, but you would never find a difference. Like for many of them, so I had an interview with somebody who gave me vapes, and they were the packaging, the labeling, everything. They also had their own brand that actually they had for more than 15 years and was known before Prop 64, but they just couldn't make this transition for for various reasons. And so that was their solution. What do we do with that? And I think one of the main problems, and I'm speaking now about Southern California, I wonder if there are any differences, but in Southern California, what happened is that many places where you could have medical cannabis collectives under Prop 215, they eventually didn't legalize, didn't allow cannabis dispensaries. And so all these dispensaries, like in Venice Beach or Laguna Beach, that existed there for at least a decade, they just had to move to a new location. And so lose all their clientele. And they tried to do it, but there are not many licenses available, and competition for licenses is huge. And it is really, really expensive to do so. And that was their choice. So they feel like we created this industry. What is our choice? Do I want, this is my living. This is how I actually, and also I know that finding a new, like maybe some people would think like, why can't you find a different job? Right? But it's not that easy if everything you did before was cannabis. So this is why I think we need to think about illegality more as a pragmatic response to this ambiguous and very complex regulatory environment. And also this framework helps us to look at legalization as a process that is based on the state power to actively exclude individuals or include individuals, because legal status is a reward that the state gives you. And it gives it its own discretion of people, of how you understand deserving or not deserving. I hope it helps, it answers the question.
Yes, no, that was really helpful. It's what you're observing, I've seen, it's hard for a consumer to distinguish between a licensed or an unlicensed dispensary. Oftentimes they do look very similar and have very similar looking products. And so, even on the consumer side, it's hard to tell. And as you're saying, it is a spectrum. I'm just going to remind everyone that if you want to ask any questions, to put them in the chat right now, because we're going to move to Q&A in a second. So just put everything in there. But I'm just going to check through some of these questions.
I see some questions on social equity more.
Yeah, I see one here about
On recourse for cannabis, yeah.
About how much of these issues that we're describing are attributed to Prop 64, the law itself, or issues that pertain to local control. So you've done a lot of work on NIMBYism and how much local government can allow or not allow dispensaries or cannabis businesses. So how would you attribute some of these problems to each of those?
I guess the way I see it, for me, legalization is a local process. And this comes from Prop 64 that said that basically by default, cannabis is illegal until local jurisdictions decide otherwise. So that's the way I see it, that it made not cannabis legal, but it made it illegal with a condition that you actually can still allow it and you'll be safe. And
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of it is about local jurisdictions. Again, I had many interviews and I went to different places with mayors in LA area and with mayors in desert areas. They all have very different perspectives on cannabis and how it help or doesn't help their communities. But also what was very interesting is going to city council meetings.
Yeah.
So I saw this NIMBY sentiments in my statistical data, and then I found visual and discursive expression of it in city council meetings, where you see a lot of it, even now. So I do think that a lot of it attributes to local implementation, and I know many people will connect it also to the higher level of federal prohibition, like if
Mhm.
cannabis wouldn't be a Schedule I drug, we wouldn't have it. I don't know if I agree with that or not. I think, and this will connect to one of the questions in chat about social equity. I think that Prop 64 or cannabis legalization in general in California seems to me like a missed opportunity to reimagine drug policies through a non-punitive lens.
Mhm.
And so we have these growing calls for harsher penalties. And I think this is a very dangerous signal in my view, because cannabis legalization is essentially about a social change and cultural change and ideational change. So it's about this profound shift in our background understandings of how we think about drugs and how we think about drug users. And we can see that many people, even in the legal cannabis space, they continue rely on this drug war stereotypes, and they continue to view cannabis through a lens of danger, prohibition, and control. So cannabis is still seen as a drug, and drugs is seen as crime, and
Mhm.
crime is always viewed through a racial lens. So this is kind of a vicious circle, and legalization, the way we have it, it couldn't address it. It could address it, but it didn't do so.
What is another way to sort of reimagine it?
Yeah, this is something I'm always asking myself. I cannot say that I have the answer, but I do think that um, that's a long I don't know how long, but this is a cultural process. And like if you legalize and at the same time you don't try to fight the stereotypes,
Mhm.
this will be really complicated, because what is happening is so legalization is often seen through the process of normalization. And especially in the past years, normalization was seen as something positive. But if you look, for example, at critical legal studies, at critical race studies, normalization is something that is criticized. So they apply critical lens to what we mean by normalization. And I think these are the questions we need to ask ourselves. So what do we mean when we say we want to create a normal market? What does it mean to regulate cannabis as a normal market? Normal for who? So what is normality, and what are the forces behind the normalization process, and who benefits from normalization? Is it an equitable process? Because often when we speak about normalization, we are speaking about placing something that has been stigmatized or prohibited for decades into the system of existing dominant or normative institutions. And market is one of these institutions. So, and this is the question, can markets become a site for social justice? If we legalize it by making it a market commodity, do we address any social justice issues? Because it seems like when you do something like that, this will inevitably benefit normative social groups and will help them to preserve their status quo. And so I think just having these conversations, that what moves forward social and cultural change, just understanding I think it would be fair just to say we legalize because we want these specific actors to benefit it, and then don't use social justice goals as a cover.
Right.
That will be
Yeah.
fair. That will be something honest. Then we don't have to speak about social justice because we know what you're doing. But don't try to sell it as a social justice reform because it is not.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, so much, there are a lot of regulations at the local and state level that have sort of been piled onto cannabis for various reasons. Some because of what you're saying, kind of a stigma or a misunderstanding about the plant, or just that it's being regulated in this time and place. And some of that is what leads to all these expenses and costs and difficulties for people to get into the regulated market. And it sounds like what you're saying is we just didn't really think through all of that necessarily through this process about if you're going to normalize it, then why all these extra layers? So it's fascinating. It's really wonderful to think through. I do have another question here in the chat. How should the state be working with local governments to reconfigure the economic viability of the industry in regards to taxes, progressive enforcement, less regulation?
How the state should work with local governments? That's a good question. So, for example, speaking about social equity programs, one thing that I find surprising is that there is actually huge, big stimuli for local governments to create social equity programs because state gives money for that. And I don't remember. I think Los Angeles, when I counted how much money, because every year you can apply for a grant and receive it, and it's like usually about from $3 to $5 million a year, you can get from the state, and yet we have only like 12 cities that applied
Mhm.
and doing it. So there probably something that could be done. At the same time, thinking about the meetings I had with city council members and mayors, it seems that what is more important for them is their constituencies and what they think. And so
Right.
if the logic of NIMBYism dominates there, um, and their communities do not want cannabis, I don't know what the state can do about it.
Mm,
Again, for me, I always see it as a bigger picture of cultural change. So like, can the state do anything to actually change that? How we think about not just cannabis, but how we think about drugs in general. Can we think about drugs and not to think about the criminal justice system right away? Is there
mm,
anything we can do about that? Can we think about drugs more through the lens of like medical institutions, right? And addressing it through different means. And so then we don't feel like this is something that is so dangerous because it's criminal.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not like the day that Prop 64 passed, just magically a wand was waved and the drug war just melted away. So it is absolutely a process. Um, so
Sorry, but I look at the question, but I do think that if you want to help existing businesses, definitely addressing taxation and providing some banking solutions is really important. So if you want to help, if you think that even corporate entities are struggling and losing because everybody is losing, this is like what I hear. Like I interviewed almost 100 people and I didn't meet even one person who would say like, yeah, I'm profitable, or I know somebody who is profitable. So nobody is profitable. And if you think about legacy operators or social equity applicants, they will be the first to leave the market. And that's what we see is happening now. I hear a lot from corporate businesses that they just keep on investing because they want to have this easy buyout. So buying all these failing businesses because they understand that at some point they will be able to capitalize on that. So yeah, solving taxation issues, solving banking issues, this is something that will definitely help all cannabis businesses.
Great. If anyone has any other questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I think there's one.
I have a
Uh,
question.
oh, go ahead, Michael.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I'm really struck. This is all super interesting and it agrees with, I've echoed a lot of what you're saying, I think, in my own work, and I've seen a lot of it on the ground for sure as an ethnographer. Um, I'm really struck by, and have similarly noted, the difference in responses to the unlicensed market, where you're talking, particularly like new actors and more corporate or well invested actors responding differently to the unlicensed market than social equity and legacy actors. And I'm wondering if you had any occasion to talk with like industry advocates, organizations that represent the industry in whatever kinds of ways, about enforcement against the unlicensed industry. And I'm curious if you've seen any like surprising alliances between industry and enforcement actors, or if it hasn't really reached that kind of level yet, if it's more just kind of a discursive tool rather than an actual forming political alliance between these entities.
Between law enforcers and businesses.
Well, not just only businesses, but their representatives, like in like industry
Yeah.
organizations and such. Yeah.
Um, so I don't have any specific example, but, and I think probably this is also what you have seen is that who actually represents the cannabis industry right now. So these are not the same organizations as before. It's all these business associations. And so, yeah, I spoke with several of them, and they would have very similar agenda saying like, yeah, we need to punish more. This all comes from the growth of the black market. It all becomes because we don't have good deterrence mechanisms. So let's work not with the reasons why actually people cannot go to the legal, but let's just punish those who are less lucky, right, to do it. So I don't have any specific examples, but I wouldn't be surprised that especially the organizations that represent the business side will be really welcoming any any collaborations with law enforcement.
Yeah, I was like really interested that I was happy to hear that you went through UCETF's kind of enforcement statistics and about the pounds they pulled. And so your response was that you did you accumulate, was it one bust or was it their entire bust for all of the year and how many pounds they were able to
Yeah,
um
I looked at the last year because I think the first year the stats for I think like maybe from the last year it was more accurate
okay.
in terms of their ability to do it. Um, it's very like proximate statistics, but yeah, I just looked at how many raised they had per year and how many pounds or retail value they seized. And then I just took the interview with one of the big cultivation company in Santa Barbara, which is one of the largest in California, and just compared what they told me they actually sell in 1 week. Or
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just not comparable at all.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so just important to highlight in terms of then what is the political response? Is, for instance, the crisis of overproduction due to black market, producers just sinking the legal market and outcompeting them, or is it really overproduction in the licensed market is actually what's driving things like the price crash and where you attribute blame? I think really has so much to do with what you're studying in terms of the delegation of stigma and how we think about like who's to be involved or whose involvement is valued versus not valued, right?
Yeah, yeah, this is a This is a great point. Yeah, it's also, I say personally, I was kind of disappointed to see that the agency that was created to oversee the market now has a law enforcement arm. Like, that's not something we expected, I guess, in 2018. But I think that's the response, because I also had interviews with 3 different people in the Department of Cannabis Control, some who oversee social equity programs. Yeah, that was interesting conversation, because I don't think they see it this way. I think they're actually responding to um, businesses' concerns about the growth of the black market and being really proud about finally doing something.
Hmm.
It looks like we have one more question. Someone's asking if you ever heard of diverted products ending up in international markets like the UK, EU, Thailand.
What I heard is that what is like, if you read LA Times, the way they describe the illegal market is like, they would say it's Mexican cartels. Again, I don't know how much it's true. But anyways, any big legal, and I know, for example, I went to Desert Hot Springs, which is near Palm Springs. So it's like just desert. And so if you go there and drive through there, you see a lot of facilities. Most of them are indoors. You will never know if it's licensed or unlicensed, but there are plenty of them. So it's really possible to grow a lot in the desert. Somehow they can solve their water supply issue, but it is happening. And what I heard is that most of this is not sold in California. This supplies the rest of the United States. It supplies the rest of the world. So I do think this is happening. But this is why we also need, like, always separate, if we speak about these big organized businesses, not businesses, but like criminal groups that need to be addressed. And I don't think that DCC with this new task force is doing this. I don't know if they have resources to do that. But again, looking at the statistics, it doesn't seem that they actually working with this large scale operations. And then speaking about those people who maybe had a license last year, but then couldn't do it anymore with the license, and maybe just moved back to selling something underground. And you cannot address these both problems with the same means, because the causes are different.
Mhm. Oh, wow. This is a lot to uncover here. Well, do you have any sort of final remarks or anything that you're looking at the moment that's interesting that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up this afternoon?
Maybe I just want to say that I think that it's really important to look at cannabis legalization, not only just as, because you're interested in cannabis. I think it's just this case of cannabis legalization in California offers a great opportunity to think about how we understand justice and equity. And because I think if we actually want cannabis, because cannabis legalization had its potential to do it. But if we actually want this to happen, we probably should start thinking how to address this deep-seated racial stigma that have shaped our views about drugs and drug users for many, many years. Because this is also such an interesting case that you create an industry and you declare that this is an industry that is based on some social equity principles. I don't know any other industry that would be just declaring that. So it's really interesting case, and I think we definitely need more studies about that, and especially in this framework of social equity and social justice.
Absolutely. I'm just so grateful for your research in this area. Very much looking forward to seeing all the work that you do in the future. Just want to remind everyone that we posted your NIMBYism report in the chat, and we'll hopefully be able to get you back on for your future work as well. So let's definitely stay in touch. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and I will hand it over to Michael to wrap us up.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you again, Katya. That was really informative and exciting work. I have a lot of like notes here about the different some great quotes. Illegality is a pragmatic response, among others. But yeah, so thank you for your work, and we look forward to seeing the new publication when it comes out. I know it's in process right now, so looking forward to that. Do we have some final slides? Okay, great. So just want to remind people that in the coming weeks, we have a few more events. One is on March 7th. The newly minted Dr. Alex Werwigen from MIT will be speaking with our Dr. Margiana Peterson-Rockne, around his work, his ethnographic work in Humboldt, living on a farm, understanding kind of the post-legalization landscape, grappling with issues around settler colonialism and environmental regulation and other kinds of matters. And then again, we'll have another event with, who is that on April 7th? Can we do the presentation mode, the share? Oh, or not?
Yes, I'm trying. Sorry, we have some hiccups.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, we have a couple upcoming. You can always find it on our website, crc.berkeley.edu. We have a number of other events that are coming into shape, including with Nevada County Cannabis Alliance and California's resource conservation districts around some work they've been doing on local ban policies. And also potentially a webinar in May looking at international dimensions of cannabis cultivation throughout the Americas. So if you can advance the slide. So here, if you want to sign up for the monthly newsletter, this is, we'll keep this slide up for a few moments until folks have filtered out. You can always sign up through this QR code on the left. And on the right, there's a link tree to follow, to register for upcoming events, check out our website, follow social media, and so on. And as always, thank you to the Resources Legacy Fund that has, given us resources to be able to hold events like this. And also to Pang Lor, who is the wonderful administrator of all of this and logistics person behind the curtain, helping us to pull this together. And also to Joanna for wonderful facilitation today. Thank you again, Katya, and we look forward to speaking more.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Pang. I think we're all good.